So apparently Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast on Spotify, and he's repeatedly spread COVID misinformation and invited guests on to do the same.
Went from Walter Cronkite basically to this guy Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons. I checked it. He believes in dragons. He believes in dragons.
Did you triple source that?
Yes, I did. And he also thinks that dragons, like I guess like dinosaur type of animals, roamed the earth when people did.
Worried about losing your job, and you're worried about podcasts taking over, and who's the source of news. And we said Donald Trump was Hitler, but half the country disagreed with us, and he won. And this is. And Joe Rogan believes in dragons.
Joe Rogan was living his usual routine when The View crossed a line it couldn't walk back. What started as a cheap jab turned into a full-scale media confrontation that shook daytime television. The shift happened the moment Joy Behar smirked on national TV and dismissed Rogan with a sneer. "Trust us," she said. "We're backed by ABC News, unlike Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons." The audience laughed, the hosts moved on, but behind the scenes, the clock had already started ticking. Rogan didn't rant on social media or fire off passive-aggressive tweets. He didn't play the outrage game. Instead, he responded the only way that actually matters, by law. A $100 million defamation lawsuit landed like a wrecking ball, ripping through the entertainment industry with subpoenas instead of sound bites. This wasn't symbolic, it wasn't a bluff, it was a calculated, evidence-heavy legal strike. Rogan's legal team accused The View of reckless and defamatory broadcasting, claims presented as fact, not opinion.
That's why people like our show, because they know that we are checked by ABC News. But
We're checked by everybody.
Yeah, I mean, if we're wrong, we have, the legal note here.
The human legal
But
I don't know. Hey, this is the most important part. This is right after she was saying, we are run by ABC News. You should trust us, not Joe Rogan, who believes in dragons. So she by saying we should trust them because they're double checked by ABC News, and then making the stupidest f***ing statement. Like you didn't listen to what I said.
Yeah.
You didn't listen to what the wildlife biologist, and that's only a part of what he said.
I can't believe
the other
Joy
part of what he
Behar
said
didn't
was
weigh-
there was something before that where he was explaining encounters with giant reptiles.
If you like this takedown, don't forget to hit subscribe button. Suddenly, the chatter stopped sounding casual. Every word spoken on that set started looking like potential evidence. The jokes weren't jokes anymore. They were liabilities. Whoopi Goldberg sat stiff as the phrase legal exposure replaced applause. Sonny Hostin's confidence cracked the moment the lawsuit hit national headlines. What had once been a daily routine of smug commentary turned into a full-blown legal crisis. This wasn't a vague accusation buried in paperwork. The complaint was precise. Episodes, timestamps, direct quotes. Every moment Rogan's name had been dragged without factual backing was laid out in black and white. While Joy Behar dismissed it with eye rolls and sarcasm, Rogan was doing the opposite. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't reacting. He was collecting evidence. Transcripts, video clips, archived broadcasts. He didn't escalate emotionally. He escalated methodically. His legal team argued the core issue clearly. These weren't framed as opinions. They were presented as facts to a mass audience. And in court, that distinction is everything. Free speech doesn't protect reckless broadcasting when it crosses into defamation. ABC wasn't ready. Executives scrambled behind closed doors, replaying footage they never expected to examine under legal scrutiny. Hours of tape were reviewed with one question hanging over every meeting. How did this get this far? Online, the backlash exploded. Dragon Believer trended everywhere.
That show has this very specific ideological bubble in which they operate in, and they always bring on a token conservative woman and they yell over her and silence her, and they did that with Meghan McCain, and they did that with what is that other blonde woman from Survivor? Do you remember her, Jamie? She was always yelling. I mean, it's a bizarre show.
And instead of backing down, Rogan leaned into it, turning mockery into strategy and ridicule into leverage. Free speech doesn't protect reckless broadcasting when it crosses into defamation. ABC wasn't ready. Executives scrambled behind closed doors, replaying footage they never expected to examine under legal scrutiny. Hours of tape were reviewed with one question hanging over every meeting. How did this get this far? Online, the backlash exploded. Dragon Believer trended everywhere. And instead of backing down, Rogan leaned into it, turning mockery into strategy and ridicule into leverage. What was meant to be a throwaway joke joke became one of the most expensive mistakes daytime television had ever made. A $100 million lawsuit doesn't whisper. It crashes through an industry. Even longtime viewers of The View were caught off guard. Years of smug dismissal were suddenly coming due. For once, the hosts weren't steering the conversation. Joe Rogan wasn't furious or theatrical. He was locked in. On his podcast, he calmly walked through the claims made about him, playing the clips in full and showing how his words had been distorted. No shouting, no dramatics, just context. That was the problem for The View. The footage was public. Millions had already seen the segment, laughed at the punchline, and absorbed the implication that Rogan was reckless or detached from reality. That impression mattered, and it was now central to the case. Rogan's attorneys didn't mince words. This wasn't disagreement. It was a pattern of accusations broadcast as fact to a massive audience. The kind that damages reputations and triggers real consequences. And those consequences followed fast. Sponsors grew uneasy. Brands began creating distance. Inside ABC, producers and lawyers met behind closed doors, trying to contain something that was already out in the open.
People want us divided, and they aren't just here in this country. They're foreign adversaries who are infiltrating our social media because it is prudent for us to stay that way. So when you see something that really pisses you off, you should triple check that one.
The bad information that's going out there.
Well, in defense, there are some really good news.
It's possible that Donald Trump did roam the earth when dinosaurs were here.
There are some really good news kind of influencer types, and I think it's great that they're getting information about global and current events in front of younger people who maybe don't tune into traditional media. But to Sarah's point, there has to be some fact-checking and actually verification of the things that are shared, because I spend a lot of time on Instagram Reels, and I'm served up things that I get outraged about, and then I realize, oh, that's not even...
One insider summed it up bluntly. This was never supposed to leave the studio, but it had. And once the lawsuit was filed, there was no putting it back. Rogan's team delivered a detailed report, statement by statement, line by line, laying out exactly where the show crossed the line. Supporters rallied, critics paused, even people who had never liked Rogan started asking the same question. Did the show finally go too far? The answer wasn't complicated, yes. And now the media had to decide how to frame it: scandal, culture war, or the inevitable result of unchecked arrogance. Years of treating opposing voices as punchlines finally caught up. What The View had brushed off for decades was now staring back as a legal problem it couldn't joke its way out of. ABC's legal team went into full emergency mode. Urgent meetings, non-stop calls, transcripts marked and remarked. This wasn't another ratings controversy. It was litigation, and Joe Rogan had forced the issue. On air, the hosts tried to keep the routine going, but the tension leaked through every segment. Whoopi Goldberg looked distracted, her usual authority slipping. Sunny Hostin clung to her notes. Joy Behar kept tossing out jokes, but none of them landed. Behind the scenes, producers were reportedly panicking. Don't say his name, don't reference the joke, don't make it worse. It didn't matter. The damage was already spreading. Rogan played the clip on his podcast. He let it run, then he stopped it and asked one quiet question. This is journalism. That was it. No rant, no outrage. Just their words, replayed without commentary. The moment went viral instantly. Millions watched as the attack collapsed under its own weight. The laughter shifted. People weren't laughing with The View anymore. They were laughing at it. Even comedians jumped in, parodying the situation and exposing how thin the original joke really was. As pressure mounted, the show's tone changed. Suddenly it was about opinions, free speech, and context. Arguments that appeared only after the lawsuit landed. But courts don't care about convenient rewrites. Rogan's legal team made their position clear. This wasn't about silencing anyone. It was about accountability. About a show that blurred the line between entertainment and accusation, then hid behind laughter when challenged. That distinction mattered more than the hosts realized. In television, tone can blur responsibility.
You know, just let's look at a scenario where the Supreme Court says, yes, he has all those rights. He is immune from everything.
Yeah.
You know what Joe Biden could do since he is presently president?
What?
Whoa. He could throw every Republican in jail.
Do you see what Whoopi Goldberg said?
What'd she say?
Whoopi Goldberg said that Biden could arrest all the Republicans and put them in jail. You just need to see how unhinged this kind of thinking is. Well, you know what Joe Biden could do? Joe Biden, you have to see it.
But in court, intent and impact are dissected frame by frame. What had been waved off as humor now sat frozen in transcripts, stripped of laughter and context, judged only by what was said and how it was presented. Inside the network, the fear wasn't just legal, it was structural. If this went to trial, every past segment suddenly became fair game. Every offhand remark, every sarcastic jab, every moment where authority was implied without evidence risked being dragged into daylight. Lawyers weren't just defending one episode anymore. They were auditing years of behavior. On camera, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Conversation softened, language tightened, confidence gave way to caution. The show that once thrived on dominance now sounded rehearsed and restrained, as if every sentence had been run through legal filters before reaching the audience. For years, The View had faced accusations of bullying guests, especially those who didn't fit the panel's worldview. Now the dynamic flipped. The show wasn't controlling the room, it was defending itself, and it wasn't doing it well. A former guest put it bluntly: the on-camera sisterhood vanished the moment the lights went off. Behind the scenes, it was competitive, hostile, and unforgiving. That quote spread fast and poured fuel on a situation already burning. Other outlets stepped in, treating the lawsuit less like gossip and more like a stress test for broadcast standards. Media analysts called it a potential turning point, one that could force networks to finally confront the difference between commentary and accusation. Public reaction split, but attention surged. Rogan's podcast numbers climbed. The View's ratings slipped. Advertisers noticed immediately. This wasn't just about optics anymore. It was about exposure. Brands didn't want their logos anywhere near a show facing a 9-figure legal threat. Contracts were quietly paused. Statements turned vague. Silence replaced confidence. Viewers began resurfacing old clips, pointing out similar moments where claims were made without evidence. The conversation shifted. This wasn't a one-off mistake, it looked like a pattern. Legal experts warned that a trial would be brutal. On air, the strain was obvious. Jokes fell flat. Confidence drained. What once passed as authority now sounded defensive. The pressure wasn't easing, it was tightening. And that pressure didn't stay confined to commentary. Inside the network, the concern shifted from damage control to containment. Executives weren't asking how to spin the story anymore. They were asking how much else might surface if the case moved forward. Every past segment suddenly looked like a liability audit waiting to happen. The hosts felt it. Conversations slowed. Statements became careful. The confidence that once powered the show gave way to hesitation.
I agree that Joe Rogan is a horror. I
mean, I'm not saying that Joe Rogan should be removed from Spotify. He's got 11 million listeners. He's got a $100 million, contract as of 2020. But I do think as the podcast platform, you have to have some sort of guidelines. How about a disclaimer on his podcast that says, this is...
Viewers noticed. The rhythm was off. The dominance was gone. What remained was a panel trying to sound certain while clearly unsure of where the next line might land. Meanwhile, Rogan stayed out of the spotlight by design. He didn't escalate the rhetoric. He didn't personalize the fight. He let the contrast speak for itself. One side scrambling to explain intent, the other standing on record and documentation. By that point, the story had moved beyond personalities. It was no longer about liking or disliking Rogan or agreeing with his views. It was about whether a long-running show had confused authority with immunity and whether it could keep doing so without consequences. That question hung over every broadcast, and the longer it lingered unanswered, the harder it became to ignore. By then, even routine conversations felt risky. Every sentence sounded pre-cleared by lawyers. What once passed as confident commentary now came out cautious and stiff. Inside ABC, leadership had to confront an uncomfortable reality. The View wasn't just controversial anymore. It was a legal exposure. Behind the scenes, the anxiety ran higher up the ladder. Executives at Disney, ABC's parent company, were reportedly furious that a show built for daytime chatter had triggered a 9-figure lawsuit involving Joe Rogan, one of the largest independent media figures on the planet. Internal guidance followed quickly. Vet segments, avoid references, eliminate anything that could be construed as personal accusation. The mood shifted from confidence to retreat. Staffers described a workplace on edge, where nothing felt spontaneous anymore. Meanwhile, Rogan kept moving forward. His legal team released a detailed breakdown of the case. Every disputed statement, every misleading claim, every broadcast moment now frozen in documentation. Online, the response accelerated. Clips of mockery circulated again, this time paired with legal analysis and commentary. The message was blunt. Sarcasm doesn't hold up in court. Evidence does. was. Rogan himself stayed measured, no tirades, no emotional appeals. He replayed the footage, laid out the facts, and let the audience draw its own conclusions. That restraint carried weight. It made the contrast unavoidable. The fallout spread beyond headlines. Sponsors began making quiet exits. No brand wanted to be adjacent to a show facing serious legal scrutiny. Producers attempted to soften the tone, pivoting toward lighter topics, but the shift felt forced. Viewers weren't interested in small talk anymore. The question of accountability was already hanging in the room, and once that question is asked publicly, it doesn't disappear just because the show wants to change the subject. On set, the shift was impossible to miss. Applause sounded thinner. Reactions felt delayed. Even the studio audience seemed unsure when to laugh. A show built on confidence now moved like it was waiting for permission to speak. That hesitation bled through the screen. Behind the curtain, contingency plans quietly formed. Legal teams mapped scenarios. Executives discussed risk thresholds. The question wasn't whether the lawsuit was inconvenient. It was how much more damage could follow if Discovery opened doors nobody wanted opened. And still, Rogan didn't blink.
Why doesn't The View have any trans women on it?
Great point. It has a lot of women that look trans, but none of them. It has a lot of second and third takes. After a drink, you'd go, huh? But it doesn't have a ton of...
He didn't frame the fight as personal. He framed it as procedural. Facts versus claims. Record versus rhetoric. Every time he replayed the footage, the contrast sharpened. One side relied on tone and authority. The other relied on documentation. Attempts to pivot the show toward lighter segments didn't land. Viewers weren't buying the reset. Once trust erodes, soft topics don't rebuild it. They just highlight avoidance. The audience sensed it, and so did advertisers. What had started as an offhand jab had now reshaped the atmosphere of an entire network property. By that point, even the studio audience felt it. Applause came late. Laughter sounded forced. A show built on momentum was now moving cautiously, as if every reaction might be replayed later in a courtroom. The View wasn't just struggling with optics anymore. It was losing authority. At the same time, Joe Rogan was gaining ground without changing his approach. His podcast surged to the top of global charts after he laid out the case in plain terms. Clips, context, and documentation. No press tour, no spin. Just a record played back in full. Commentators across the spectrum weighed in. Some framed it as a reckoning for legacy media. Others saw it as a warning shot, proof that size and platform don't grant immunity. Either way, the story wasn't fading. It was expanding. When asked whether he planned to settle, Rogan's response was brief. Let's see what the truth brings. That line traveled fast. Newsrooms understood what it implied. This wasn't about a payout, it was about precedent. The show's response came late and carefully worded. Vague denials, ongoing reviews, no specifics. By then, it didn't move the needle. Too many clips were already circulating. Too many contradictions were documented. Even longtime supporters began questioning whether the show had finally crossed a line it couldn't defend. Inside ABC, the conversation turned serious. Options that once seemed unthinkable were quietly discussed. Reshuffling hosts, structural changes, even whether the format itself had become more risk than reward. Parent company Disney wasn't interested in ideology. It was interested in exposure.